Have you ever wondered about the quiet heroes among us? The ones who operate not with thunderous roars, but with a silent, unshakable authority that commands respect far beyond any rank or title. This is the story of Captain Riley Monroe, a woman whose extraordinary past and present missions will make you rethink what it truly means to be a guardian of the skies. Prepare to be moved by a tale where true power isn't about the loudest voice or the fastest jet, but about the profound trust and wisdom that can silence an entire squadron with a single confirmed name. Formation now, boxing her in at all four corners. Their sleek, angular silhouettes gleamed against the afternoon sun, engines humming like restrained predators. She could almost feel the tension through the airwaves as they waited for her next move. Any second now, they'd escalate again. Unidentified aircraft, last warning. You will comply, or we will escort you to the nearest airfield by force. Raptor Lead's voice came again, clipped and precise, but sharper this time, his patience fraying. Riley's lips curved into the faintest smirk. He was good, disciplined, professional, but not infallible. She could hear the strain hiding just beneath the surface of his calm. Every second she stayed silent was another second their nerves tightened, another data point for the Pentagon's analysts to study later. She let her gaze sweep the cockpit, her fingers light and steady on the controls of the L-39. The Albatross wasn't much compared to the Raptors. Older, slower, less intimidating, but that wasn't the point. The point was what she could do in it and who she was. A lifetime ago, she'd flown aircraft these hotshot kids had only seen on recruiting posters. Her records were sealed tighter than the vaults at Fort Knox. Half the missions she flew didn't officially exist, and now here she was, the target of their most advanced intercept squadron, playing the role of an intruder in their precious Sector Omega. She caught another glimpse of them through the canopy, Raptor 2 and Raptor 3 to her left and right. Raptor led just ahead now, Raptor 4 covering her rear. They moved in perfect synchronization, like a steel wolf pack tightening around its prey. And still she stayed quiet. On the ground far below in the dimly lit Sector Command Center, the duty officer's hand hovered near his headset, his eyes darting nervously between radar displays. "Sir," he called to the sector commander, "she's not responding to hails. Raptors have her surrounded." The sector commander's jaw tightened as he watched the unfolding chess match on the screens. "Keep them in formation. Do not fire unless authorized. Get me the Pentagon, now." A communications officer was already dialing into secure lines, voice low and urgent. Hundreds of miles away, in a vaulted conference room at the Pentagon, General Harrison stood behind a long table, arms crossed as he watched the live feed. The Secretary of Defense sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he listened to the sector commander's increasingly anxious updates. "She's pushing it," Harrison muttered under his breath. "She's supposed to," the Secretary of Defense replied flatly, without looking up. At Edwards Air Force Base, a colonel stood in his own control room, his face pale as he realized who they were dealing with. Riley Monroe. Of course. He remembered her reputation well enough to know exactly how far she could push, and how dangerous she really was when cornered. Back in the sky, Raptor Lead's voice cut through the radio again, this time with unmistakable edge. "Unidentified aircraft. Final warning. You are ordered to comply now. If you do not respond, we will engage." Riley's smirk softened into something like satisfaction. They were right on script, right on the edge where fear met duty, where hesitation could cost lives, but overconfidence could start wars. She exhaled slowly, her thumb hovering over her own secure mic switch. Time to see if command would blink before the pilots did. Her radar detector was lit up like a battlefield, every alarm telling her what she already knew. There was no way out of here but through, and she was fine with that. Every eye was on her now, from the Raptor's cockpits to sector command to the vaulted Pentagon war room, waiting to see if she'd crack. But Captain Riley Monroe didn't crack. Not then, not ever. They were in the perfect position to intercept. Every maneuver precise, every formation drilled into muscle memory through years of relentless training. Flawless, Riley thought as she watched the F-22s wheel into place around her. Textbook execution. But the real test, she knew, was just beginning. and it wasn't one they could practice for. Somewhere far below, she imagined the phones already ringing in the corridors of power, alarms flashing on screens in secure rooms. This was where it got interesting. The radio crackled to life on the open frequency, a crisp, clipped voice cutting through the air. Unidentified aircraft, this is Raptor-led. You have 10 seconds to respond, or we will consider you hostile. There it was. That certain edge she remembered well from her own time in combat, professional yet threaded through with steel. These pilots weren't bluffing. On the squadron's internal channel, which wasn't as secure as they probably assumed, her own equipment picked up their chatter clearly. Raptor 2 to lead. I've got visual on the bogey. Looks like an old L-39 Albatross, probably just some rich guy showing off his toy. Stay focused, Raptor 2, came the immediate reply from Lead. I am focused, Lead, Raptor 2 shot back, his tone light, focused on not scratching the paint job on Daddy's expensive airplane. Thing looks like it cost more to restore than my house. Riley couldn't help a faint smile. Confidence? A solid 10 out of 10. Situational awareness? Clearly some room for improvement. Then Raptor Lead's voice came again over the open frequency, harder now, leaving no doubt he was about to escalate. Final warning, civilian aircraft. Respond immediately or you will be forced down. She kept her heading steady, letting them close in. Their formation tightened, moving into an attack posture that was, she noted approvingly, perfect. If she were a real threat, she'd already be done for. But of course, she wasn't. And that was when everything started to unravel. At Sector Command just a couple hundred meters away, the control room was a hive of sudden activity as priority alerts lit up the boards. A duty officer froze mid-sip of his coffee, staring at his screen. Sir, we've just received an encrypted signal from the unidentified aircraft. The sector commander was already striding to the console. What kind of signal? Classification? The young officer swallowed hard, his face pale. Sir, it's presidential-level clearance. For a long second, no one moved. No one spoke. The commander's face drained of color as words began scrolling across the main screen in stark white letters. Clearance, presidential directive. Subject, Captain Riley Monroe, do not engage. Provide escort. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Everyone in the room recognized that name, or at least everyone at this level of command should have. The commander's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the radio. Raptor Squadron, abort. I repeat, abort intercept. Stand down immediately and provide escort. High above, Raptor Lead's steady confidence faltered audibly. Command, say again. Did you say, abort? You heard me, Lead, came the reply. Abort. The aircraft is authorized at the highest levels. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. On the internal squadron frequency, the tone shifted at once. Raptor 2's earlier swagger was gone. Lead, did he just say what I think he said? A long pause followed. Then Raptor Lead's voice, quieter now, respectful. Ma'am, Captain Monroe, this is Raptor Lead. We weren't informed of your mission. The airspace is clear today. Wishing you a safe flight. Riley finally keyed her mic, her tone calm, even bored. Raptor Lead, this is Monroe. Appreciate the escort. Form up on my 6. I'll be maintaining current heading and altitude. Yes, ma'am. Raptor Squadron forming up for escort. On their internal channel, she heard Raptor 2 again, his voice deflated now, almost awed. Dude, we just tried to shoot down a legend. Shut up, 2, someone snapped back. Just shut up and fly. Riley allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The test was over. But the real lesson, she thought, was only just beginning. Back at Sector Command, junior officers were frantically pulling up her classified file on secured terminals. What they read made even seasoned professionals' hands shake. Distinguished Flying Cross. Silver Star. Combat missions across 3 theaters. And then the final line. The line that made them all lean back and exchange uneasy glances. Special access required. Presidential authority only. The sector commander wiped a bead of sweat from his temple. In 30 years of military service, he thought grimly, he had never once seen clearance codes like that. Sector was now part of a test it hadn't even known was happening. And he, in turn, was being tested too, whether he could follow protocol even when everything in him screamed this couldn't possibly be right. In the sky, Riley Monroe sat calmly in the cockpit, her gloved fingers resting lightly on the stick. Below her, the ground glittered in the sun like shards of broken glass. And all around her, the Raptors kept their perfect diamond formation. She could feel them watching her even though they didn't speak, feel the tension crackling in their silence. The young pilots in those F-22s probably thought they'd trained for everything. But no simulator or manual could prepare you for a day when the target you're ordered to intercept already has the authority to intercept you instead. Riley's eyes flicked over her altimeter and her fuel gauge before glancing at the clear, endless stretch of sky ahead. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The most important thing was to never let them see you hesitate. Authority wasn't about being loud, it was about being undeniable. And nothing was more undeniable than the right codes spoken into the right ears. The $4 billion fighter jets behind her may have carried enough firepower to level a city block, but their weapons would stay cold so long as her clearance stayed hot. Below, at Sector Command, a storm was brewing behind closed doors. The commander stood stiffly at the center of the control room while the communications officer read more from Riley's personnel file, his voice breaking the silence in slow, reverent fragments. "She's not just former military, sir. She's the one who wrote the intercept playbook. The Raptors are following procedures she designed." The commander didn't reply, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. "She flew missions in airframes so advanced we still don't admit they exist. Carried out stealth ops so deep into enemy territory the reports are sealed even now. Every exercise she touches becomes a real-world threat scenario, and every pilot she meets comes away sharper. She..." "Keep reading it," the commander ordered, though his stomach was sinking faster with every word. "She was brought out of retirement for something called Operation Ghostwing. Sir, that's why she's here." The commander's gaze sharpened. "What is Ghostwing?" The young officer swallowed hard before answering. "She is authorized by presidential directive to penetrate U.S. airspace without notice at any time using any means necessary to test our defenses. Her mission is to find the holes we can't see ourselves." The commander felt his chest go tight, as though a giant hand were pressing down. The Raptors outside hadn't intercepted an intruder today. They'd been intercepted by her, by the test itself. Across the country, in the Pentagon's Secure Command Center, it was no less chaotic. Phones blared on every desk, red and green indicator lights flashing like emergency beacons. The duty officer was already on one line with NORAD when another aide thrust a tablet into his hands. The general on duty barely glanced at the cover before his eyes widened. "Captain Riley Monroe," he read aloud to himself. His fingers scrolled faster and faster through her record. There were rows of decorations and commendations, the kind that only came with missions no one was supposed to talk about. There were assignments so highly classified that even the dates were blacked out. And finally, there was a single line under her current posting that made his hand stop mid-scroll. He exhaled slowly. "She's the ghost pilot," he murmured. His aide gave a grim nod. "Sir, she reports directly to the President, the Secretary of Defense, and General Harrison. No one else." The general picked up the secure phone on his desk and barked into the receiver. "Get me the Secretary of Defense. Right now." Meanwhile, the four Raptors continued to hold their disciplined formation behind Riley's old jet, flying in silence as the sun lit up their sharp wings like knives of silver. None of their pilots dared break radio silence, but she could imagine what they were thinking. They'd come up here ready to bring down a rogue pilot, and instead found themselves escorting the most dangerous woman in American airspace. In the cockpit, Riley allowed herself the faintest of smiles. There were some names you didn't need to explain, some clearances that didn't need to be justified, and some orders that even the most powerful fighter jets in the world couldn't question. Because at the end of the day, she thought, the loudest roar in the sky still bows to the quiet authority of a single signature on the ground. High above the shimmering Pacific, Riley Monroe kept her jet steady, her gaze calm, her hands sure on the controls as the world passed in streaks of cloud and sunlit sea. On either side of her, F-22s held a perfect diamond formation, wings angled with disciplined precision. She could hear their tension over the open comms, even though they tried hard to sound composed and professional. Raptor lead to Raptor 2 maintains separation. We're escorting, not intercepting. Copy, lead. But just who exactly are we escorting? Riley let the corner of her mouth curl into a faint smile. She decided to ease their confusion just enough. She pressed her mic button, her voice warm yet clipped with authority. Raptor Squadron, this is Monroe. You boys flew a textbook intercept. Response time? Excellent. Formation discipline? Outstanding. Your commanding officers should be proud. For a moment there was silence. Then Raptor Lead's reply came back, and you could almost hear the relief in it. Thank you, ma'am. If you don't mind me asking, how many times have you done this particular route? She almost chuckled. Today marks my 15th run in the past 2 years. Different squadrons. Same results. American airspace is in good hands. The silence that followed that revelation was heavier, more thoughtful. 15 times. 2 years. And none of them, not a single pilot she'd tested, had known what she was really doing here. Then a humbler, quieter voice broke in. Ma'am, have we ever failed any of these tests? Riley smiled just slightly, invisible behind her visor. Son, the fact you're asking tells me you haven't. On the ground, hundreds of miles away, a phone rang sharply in the office of the squadron commander at Edwards Air Force Base. The colonel picked it up out of habit, his greeting crisp, only to freeze when the deep voice on the other end identified itself. Colonel, this is General Harrison, Pentagon. That name alone made the colonel stand a little straighter, even though no one else was watching. Sir, he managed, my pilots followed standard protocol. They couldn't have known. Colonel, Harrison interrupted, calm but unmistakably firm. Your pilots performed flawlessly. Captain Riley Monroe personally requested your squadron for this evaluation. She believes you field the best intercept team on the West Coast. Relief swept through the colonel like cool water. Thank you, sir. But may I ask, why wasn't I informed? Because, Colonel, the test only works if no one knows it's happening. Your pilots reacted to a real unknown with real-world threat protocols. That's what made their performance valuable. At that same moment, deep inside the Pentagon's most secure conference room, 7 people sat around a polished table. The Secretary of Defense flipped the final page of Riley Monroe's latest report with deliberate care. He let his eyes sweep the table before speaking. Gentlemen, Captain Monroe has just completed her quarterly assessment of our Pacific Coast air defenses. Her findings are, concerning. A 4-star general leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowed. Concerning in what way, sir? The secretary placed his hands flat on the report. Our response times are too fast. Our pilots are too well trained. Our systems are too effective. Confused glances shot from one man to the next. The secretary continued, his tone grave. If a real threat ever penetrates our airspace using similar tactics to Captain Monroe's, we risk shooting down one of our own assets before we can properly identify it. That is what this evaluation reveals. The weight of those words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Riley hadn't just been testing how well they could stop a threat. She'd been testing whether they could tell the difference between what was and wasn't a threat. And the margin was dangerously thin. Back in the sky, Riley's jet streaked toward the horizon, her test flight almost complete. For over an hour now, the Raptors had flown in perfect formation alongside her, and the tension that had gripped them at first had gradually faded as realization dawned. They were flying with a legend, Captain Riley Monroe. Then Raptor Lead's voice came over the comms again, hesitant but earnest. Permission to ask a personal question, ma'am? Riley allowed herself a small grin, even though no one could see it. Go ahead, son. Ma'am, why do you still do this? You've already proven yourself 100 times over. Her smile faded slightly as she considered her answer, her voice quiet but carrying conviction. Because Raptor Lead, the moment we stop testing ourselves is the moment we become vulnerable. Every pilot in your squadron is the reason Americans can sleep safely at night, but someone has to make sure you're ready for anything. A brief silence. Then the pilot added, a little bolder now, even ready for you, ma'am? Riley's response was immediate, firm, and faintly amused. especially ready for me, because if you can handle me showing up in your airspace unannounced." She let the words hang just long enough, her tone both a challenge and a promise. "Then you can handle anyone. Strength, your courage is our shield." The colonel nodded solemnly, visibly moved. Around the table, the pilots straightened in their seats, absorbing every word. Riley could see the weight of her message settling on them, not as a burden, but as a quiet pride. These weren't just kids in expensive jets anymore. Tonight, they understood they were custodians of something far greater than themselves. Raptor Lead raised his glass first. "To vigilance," he said, his voice steady but softer now. One by one, the others followed, their glasses clinking together in a modest but heartfelt toast. Riley let the moment linger before speaking again. Her eyes swept over each of them, her tone as even and calm as it had been in the sky. "One day you'll sit where I'm sitting, and you'll test the next generation. When you do, remember, the sky belongs to those who never stop watching, never stop questioning, never stop preparing. You proved that tonight. Don't ever forget it." Raptor 3 grinned faintly, but there was respect in his gaze now, not cockiness. "Ma'am," he said, "does it ever get easier, flying in like that, knowing they're coming for you?" Riley allowed herself a quiet laugh. It wasn't a warm sound exactly, but it wasn't unkind either. "No," she admitted, "and that's the point. If it ever feels easy, it means you've stopped paying attention." Raptor 2, who'd been unusually quiet all evening, cleared his throat and added, almost shyly, "We'll be ready next time." Riley smiled faintly. "That's what I'm counting on," she said. The colonel excused himself shortly after, shaking her hand firmly before he left. As the squadron commander disappeared into the dim hallway, the pilots around the table relaxed a little, letting the tension of the day finally ease. Someone waved down the bartender for another round. As the conversation drifted into more mundane stories about training mishaps and harmless pranks, Riley leaned back in her chair, quietly observing them. These young men, laughing and teasing each other, didn't realize they'd already crossed a threshold tonight. They were no longer just operators of a machine. They were defenders of the invisible line, that fragile balance between vigilance and trust. Later, when the night had grown quiet and the club had begun to empty out, Raptor Lad walked her out to the parking lot. The desert air was cool and still, the stars above sharp and endless. He stopped by her car, hands in his pockets. "Captain Monroe," he said, hesitant at first. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did tonight, for what you do. I didn't get it before, but now I do." Riley studied him for a moment. He was young, but there was a steadiness in his eyes now, a flicker of the kind of resolve that couldn't be taught in any classroom. "You'll make a fine leader," she said at last. "Just remember, no matter how fast or how high you can fly, trust and judgment will always be your most powerful weapons." Raptor Lead smiled faintly, then stepped back, raising his hand in a sharp salute. Riley returned it without hesitation. She slipped into her car, started the engine, and drove off into the darkness. In her rearview mirror, she caught one last glimpse of the young pilot standing alone under the stars, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of the base behind him. Tomorrow she'd be somewhere else, another base, another squadron, another test, because that's what ghosts do. They come when you least expect them, silent, watchful, unrelenting, making sure you're ready, even when you don't know you're being watched. The table fell into a heavy, almost reverent silence. These weren't just words spoken by a superior officer. No, they carried the weight of someone who had dedicated her entire career, and perhaps her soul, to ensuring that America's defenders were always ready, always sharp, always worthy of the trust placed in them. Every pilot at that table felt it, even if they couldn't quite put it into words. As Captain Riley Monroe gathered her things to leave, Raptor 2 stepped toward her, his movements hesitant, his voice soft and unsure. "Ma'am, just one more question. About today's test. How did we really do?" Riley stopped and turned to him, her expression unreadable, her gaze steady as stone. "Your response time was good," she said flatly. "Flying skills were solid." She let that sink in before continuing. "Radio communication skills?" She paused, the silence stretching just long enough to sting. "I have some notes." Without another word, she turned on her heel and strode away, leaving Raptor 2 standing there, frozen in place, his cheeks flushing crimson. Behind him, his squad mates struggled to suppress their laughter, snickers breaking through here and there. The lesson was clear and complete. 6 months later, Raptor 2 found himself in a very different position. It was his turn to lead. For the first time, he commanded his own flight, guiding his F-22 through the same expanse of airspace where he had once crossed paths with Captain Monroe. The memory of her calm authority followed him, as constant and quiet as the sky itself, a lesson no training manual had ever taught. His radio crackled to life. Raptor lead, we've got an unidentified aircraft entering restricted airspace. Single engine, low and slow. He glanced down at his instruments, checked his formation, and allowed himself the faintest smile. Copy that, he replied, voice calm. Raptor flight form up for intercept. Standard procedures. But then he added, his tone measured, deliberate. And remember, he paused just long enough to make them listen. Not everything that enters our airspace is what it appears to be. His wingman's voice came back, tinged with curiosity. Led? What do you mean by that? I mean, Raptor 2 said evenly, we intercept professionally, we identify properly, and we wait for authorization before we start making assumptions about who we're dealing with. As they closed in on the unknown aircraft, Raptor 2's mind drifted back to that day in the officers' club, to the words Monroe had left hanging in the air like smoke. Real authority doesn't announce itself, it simply exists. Quiet, unshakable. The aircraft in question turned out to be nothing more than a lost Cessna pilot who had strayed off course. A simple mistake, corrected with a simple escort back to proper airspace. Raptor 2 handled it with the same professionalism and composure that Riley had once demanded of him, knowing full well that the next time might not be so straightforward. Because he also knew that someday, maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, another test pilot from the Pentagon could appear in his skies. Another ghost checking to see if America's guardians still lived up to their sacred duty. Far across the country, in a quiet Washington office, Riley Monroe sifted through a thick stack of reports from air defense installations up and down the coast. Her so-called ghost flights had become the stuff of legend among the few who were even aware of them. In hushed conversations late at night, young pilots swapped stories about the mysterious woman who appeared out of nowhere, tested everything they thought they knew, and disappeared just as silently. Over the past year, she'd tested more than 50 installations, and at each one she found what she was looking for. Pilots who treated their duty with deadly seriousness, who followed orders to the letter, who protected their skies with unflinching dedication. But more importantly, she found something else, something no checklist could measure. She found young aviators who had learned the quiet truth she herself carried every time she strapped into a cockpit. In the sky, the loudest voice doesn't always carry the most authority. Riley set down the final report, picked up her secure phone, and dialed a classified line. Mr. Secretary, she said when the call was answered, her voice even, resolute. This is Monroe. I've completed the annual assessment of our Pacific Coast defenses. The Secretary's voice came back immediately. And your findings, Captain? She didn't hesitate. Sir, our pilots are ready. They're not just flying the most advanced aircraft in the world. They're thinking like the defenders we need them to be. And there was a pause on the other end, and then, any recommendations? Riley let her eyes drift to the window where the sky stretched out in a flawless blue expanse. Keep testing them, sir, she said finally. The moment we stop challenging ourselves is the moment we become vulnerable. She hung up the phone and reached for her flight jacket, her fingers brushing over the worn leather collar as though it still held the chill of high-altitude winds. Tomorrow, another squadron would find itself tested in some other quiet corner of American airspace. Another group of young pilots would come to understand what Riley had always known, that the sky belongs to those who earn it every single time they climb into their jet, because somewhere above the clouds, quiet authority still rules the skies. It silences even the loudest fighter jets, and it always will.